Staying in the United States, the presidential election there is a year away, and Donald Trump could be heading for a tough race. An average of all the opinion polls puts Trump's approval rating at just above 41%. But much more ominously for him, almost 55% of Americans disapprove of the job he's doing. A key question is, who will Trump face in the 2020 election? Most polls predict that if it's former Vice President Joe Biden, Trump will lose. But many polls suggest the more progressive Democratic candidate, Elizabeth Warren, could also have a slight edge over Trump. Opinion polls are one way of assessing which way the election could go. Another is to look at bellwether regions. Richland County in Wisconsin has proved to be a reliable indicator. Since 1980, the county has always voted for the winning candidate. So DW correspondent Oliver Sallet traveled to Richland to gauge the mood.
Feeding time for dairy farmer Mark Stoltz and his calves. Like most people in Richland County, Stoltz voted for President Trump in 2016, but twice for Barack Obama in the elections before. This time, he says, the political mood is anything but clear.
We tend to like Trump more than most people, so we don't talk a whole lot about it, but it can get very testy very quickly, even within our family.
Even though he voted for Trump in the last election, Mark Stoltz cares about key democratic issues like healthcare and climate change. He also wants an end to the president's trade war, which has hit farmers like him particularly hard, he says.
So that's hurt. We don't have a good place to ship milk and whey products and cheese, and so right now the market's got a lot of milk and cheese on it, and Americans are drinking less milk. Wisconsin lost over 600 dairy farms in the last year.
Richland Center, with its 5,000 citizens, is the largest town in Richland County, a bellwether for the presidential election. Since 1980, the majority here has always voted for the winning candidate.
Richland County is traditionally a Republican county. Do we always vote that way? No.
I wouldn't vote for him. I don't like him. I think if he'd keep his mouth shut and stay off of Twitter, he would be fine.
I think it's with all the impeachment stuff, it's going to be very noisy and interesting for the next year. But if I was betting today, I would bet he'll get elected again.
At the local newspaper, editor Dawn Kiefer says left and right-wing supporters in the county are fighting for the public's attention. She is often criticized for printing opinion letters that are too critical of President Trump.
I suggest to those persons they ought to write letters, their own selves, expressing their beliefs, but most of those people decline, and they don't explain why not. I suspect they don't want their name in the paper.
Dairy farmer Mark Stoltz says the decisive factor for him will be who the Democratic contender is. If the candidate is too progressive, he might stick with Donald Trump, even if that means more suffering for him and the farmers of Richland County.
And Tyson Barker from the Aspen Institute Berlin joins me now in the studio. Thanks for being here, Tyson.
Of course.
What are the big issues for American voters right now?
Well, it really depends on who you're talking about, which voter. For the Democratic voters, the number one issue is health care, followed by the economy, climate change, taxes, education. For Republican voters, it still remains immigration, security, trade, also the economy. Also for Democratic voters, the number one issue that keeps coming up in all these debates that keep occurring is who can beat Donald Trump. And that's a really ephemeral quality because that's all based on, their policies, on the way they come forward as a leader, et cetera. But you're really seeing a very segmented population. It depends on the state. It depends on your interest. As we just heard, dairy farmers and farmers across America are hurting because of the trade war. So that's going to have an impact. There's a lot of issues out there.
Yeah, big country. How is the big country looking at the impeachment process, and how is that going to hurt or help Democratic or Republican candidates?
So far, the impeachment process has still been a lot of inside baseball. You've had these depositions that have taken place behind closed doors. Republicans have been pushing a line that's, a critique of the process, saying that it hasn't been transparent enough. Now there has been a vote to go forward with the impeachment inquiry in public with hearings where they'll call these witnesses to testify in public. So now the process will become a lot more out in the open. The question is really a question of timing. How long is this impeachment process going to last in the House, and then how long is the trial going to last in the Senate? If we conclude this whole process before the end of the year, which both the House and the Senate are looking to do, then this won't probably be an issue next year unless, of course, he is impeached and removed.
Okay, now coming back to the Democrats, the first test of the potential Democratic candidates' popularity comes in Iowa and New Hampshire in a few months, as you know.
Right.
What are the first indications from the polls as to who might be a front runner?
So, again, great bellwether states, very interesting states, overwhelmingly white states, overwhelmingly rural states. And where you stand is where you sit a little bit. In Iowa, the Democratic population tends to be a little more liberal. There's a big college population there. And it's essentially a four-way horse race. All four of the top candidates are between 22 and 18%. That's Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, and Pete Buttigieg. And Biden has been slipping in Iowa, which is somewhat of a problematic indicator for him in other states going forward. In New Hampshire, it's a lot more about geography. So we have Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont, the neighboring state, and Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts, the neighboring state. Both have a lot of infrastructure that they can flood into the state to kind of bring up their support in New Hampshire. So this is going to be quite interesting to see where this goes. But again, those states are not reflective of the entire population. More nationally, which is what's quite interesting, is Biden's support continues to melt away. But his base of support continues to be among African Americans, and the primary in South Carolina is going to be decisive in that.
Okay, Tyson Barker from the Aspen Institute, Berlin. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
New polling from 6 important states in the next election shows voters there back the impeachment inquiry, but not so much removal from office. 50% of voters in Pennsylvania, Florida, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Arizona support the Democrats' impeachment inquiry, while 45% oppose the investigation. Only 43% of voters in those states support impeachment when coupled with removal. 53% oppose it. Nate Cohn of the New York Times points out, quote, the results suggest that the president continues to be stronger in the top battleground states than he is nationwide. This is keeping his narrow path to re-election alive and insulating him and his party from national political opinion to an extent. Here with us again tonight is Carolyn Ryan, assistant managing editor for the New York Times. Thank you for coming back.
Sure thing.
I asked this of all of our political guests. A, if I gave you construction paper, a map of the U.S. and crayons, could you find a path to re-election as of right now tonight for Donald Trump and the Electoral College, A, and B, what excites you or bores you about these new poll numbers?
Well, I mean, I think the poll is fascinating. Yes, I could find that path. But there's a lot of rich data in here, and I think you have to look at this as a continuum. People, even though there's not a majority, unlike in the Fox poll and other polls, for impeachment as in removal, there is movement toward both support for the inquiry and toward support for removal. So there's a very small sliver of people who are for an impeachment inquiry, meaning go investigate him, but they haven't yet decided Trump should be removed. Who are those people? They tend to be young. They tend to be low information voters. They're very cynical about politicians in general. They think this is how people in public office act, and they're not surprised by what Trump is doing. So if the Democrats want to convince that group of people, and I think they need to in those states, they have to show that this is atypical, aberrant, extreme misbehavior. It's not run-of-the-mill political misconduct. And that's the challenge that they have.